it then doesn't really matter. If you're an Australopithecine female and you can hit carry in a sling, it doesn't matter whether that infant is helpless for a week, a month, or a year, because you've actually solved the problem. And that opens the way then for increased pleomorphism. Then if you have selection pressure on intelligence, for example, which you might then have because you're in an increasingly technological world where being smart enough to invent things and make things well is beginning to count for more in terms of your competitive survival, then you get an upward pressure on basically the infants that are slower maturing are going to be the ones that end up producing the greatest genetic effect. That's just a graph of some of the issues that happen as the pelvis remodels, and I won't go into that. So effectively, natural selection, because it happened, we've kind of ignored this paradox. But natural selection pressures mean that walking upright should have excluded encephalization on prima facie biomechanical grounds. And you know, to argue the way I've done, I know I'm on dangerous ground. I mean, I'm not the first person to bring up the baby sling idea. It's been around among feminist paleoanthropologists for about 40 years, and it always runs up against the thing, but they don't survive, so it's just theory. But I mean, there are a lot of things, I'm afraid, that we have to infer logically to make a coherent picture. The sorts of facts that we may be able to get to dignify this eventually will be things like asymmetry. I mean, carrying in Victorian Britain, for example, shawl carrying, which was done by siblings and young mothers, produces quite a lot of asymmetry in the upper skeleton. We've got a lot of the ulna in particular. Ulnar length alters actually remodels on one side and not the other. But it's also clear that we underestimate, I think, as archaeologists, the sophistication of technology in the past. This is my favourite object from my favourite site where I quite often visit, the site of Hallstatt in Austria. This is the Bronze Age part of the salt mine, and this is a pine wood modular staircase dating to 1344 BC on dendrochronology, and it's one length of a modular staircase. You can fit these wherever you like in the mine, and they've got alterable tread angle, and three can walk abreast up here. You can fit it at whatever angle you want and make it as long as you want, as short as you want, and pack it up, reassemble it. And if you didn't have the salt preservation, you wouldn't have hypothesized that level of technological sophistication. And there are carry sacks from that site as well. We know them then ethnographically, but we know them from Hallstatt. We've got quite a few examples, but we can't push actual archaeological finds of this sort of thing back into the time scale of 100,000 years or 1 million years, or, as I'm arguing, over 2 million years ago, and we never will be able to. They won't survive in any form. But effectively, they allow us to become a marsupial ape and to continue gestation in a technological womb where the brain can actually then develop, expand and hardwire itself in a cultural milieu, increasingly linguistic, increasingly seeing through the eyes the use of material culture technology by parents and the rest of the group. And that must have profound effects. That just graphs the rate against a log scale. I shouldn't have put it on a log actually, because it's much more dramatic if you look at it, but it's to do with brain weight after birth, and it's massively more in humans than in chimpanzees. So this is from the Observer last week. This was the bit that was picked up on, this idea that we're the products of our own technology. So what have I got to say about modern technology? Just in about 5 minutes, if I can, David, I'll just go over what, we've talked about what a pebble does for us. I want to know what a Motorola pebble does for us. And particularly, I want to come to this end of the graph now. So just broadly summarising what I've said, I think that here we've got stone tools coming in for the first time, and I would put the baby sling in this period. It's what allows that takeoff, which couldn't otherwise happen. But what causes this? I'm very interested in this, and yet it's often noted that many Neanderthals, not all of them, but many Neanderthals had larger brains than us, but also Homo sapiens between 100,000 and 30,000 years ago, quite a lot of large crania. Not all, it's a very wide range, but you can see that here's the modern average, and it's very interesting when you graph it that the majority of fossil remains going back to the emergence of Homo sapiens around about 200,000 years ago have a larger brain capacity than we do today. And the sort of flattering argument we like to make about this is that maybe they were like gas-guzzling cars, and we are kind of nippy little, you know, modern, well-powered. And I don't think that's the case. I think what happens, of course, at this point, between 50 and 30,000 years ago, is we have the emergence of the symbolic revolution. We have the point at which we begin to be able to farm intelligence out and no longer have to remember things. So I would argue that Neanderthals probably innately, in terms of innate biological brain power, however, whatever we want to call it, was smarter than I am. They weren't smarter than I am with my computer, but they were smarter than I am without it. And it's the fact that we began to develop this symbolic culture, which I won't go into the whole materiality theory now, I don't have time, but basically beginning to create images and notations by which things could be remembered. We began to be able to need less innate brain capacity. This is the Brno puppet. It's another one of my favourite objects. This is from 28,000 years ago in Brno. It's a mammoth ivory puppet that would have been articulated probably with sinew and could do a little dance for you. Carved out of mammoth ivory. And of course there's a whole set of implications of this which I won't go into now, but it leads obviously to the emergence of ideas about creation. Once people become this creative and they make models of themselves that will move, questions such as, well, who made me, come up. And so curiously, right there at the birth of technological science in a complex way, there's also the birth of creationism and literal religious ideas of things being made by a higher power. As I say in the book, it's all in a sense part of the same mindset, or one can easily flock from one to the other. And just to continue my pot shots against memes, pot shot with billiard ball here, that obviously one of the things I love about technology, once it comes off the leash, is that it has all these random effects, these things that I'm particularly interested in skeuomorphism. This is a skeuomorph. It's not real wood, but we expect tables ought to look like this, so we stick this stuff on. It doesn't fool anyone, but it meets an expectation. And at the time that Darwin was knocking billiard balls around a down house that were carved out of elephant ivory and rounded off, that were, if you like, the technological successors of the head of the Brno puppet, elephant numbers on the African savannah absolutely crashed because of the popularity of billiards in the late 19th century, and put an immense pressure on people finding synthetic solutions, out of which, as you will know, came the first plastics, and the sorts of ball bearings that are actually in the knees of the first bipedal, truly, completely technological 8 Honda's Asimo robot, which then plays football. But you can see there that the idea is this complicated unfolding with unexpected consequences. The people trying to find a solution for billiard balls were not thinking about building robots that could ultimately play billiards. Finally, I just want to talk about the fact that technology now insulates us so much from genetic and environmental pressures that we are building up at a rapid rate a whole series of biological deficits. Eyesight is a very obvious example.